I want to thank you for coming, those of you who are here. And I want to thank Diane for coordinating this event. I haven't done a reading on this scale, I guess I'll call it, with time for a very long time. And so if I drift and wander, it's because I don't have a real clear sense of time. And I am going to be reading through a fairly set list of poems. So I've asked Diane to rein me in if I start drifting, as my mind often does. But you know, it was a question of whether to agree to read on September 11th, and I decided it's a good day to do it because we have distance enough on 9/11 that you know, if it were something happening right now, maybe the appropriate response would be silence. But I think occasions like this one, with that distance, is also a time to reflect and to take a longer view and to sort of digest maybe some of what's happening now at a remove. And so I've been thinking about many of my dead, and the most recent has been my Tai Chi teacher, who died in September of last year. And he was a teacher, a friend, and an only brother, like an older brother. So I'm still kind of trying to process that particular loss. And the shape of my reading is really part of a lesson I learned from him in moving from practice to performance of Tai Chi. And so I need to preface that by saying, in choosing the poems I'm reading, I don't have any poems about my late husband, and yet he's everywhere here. And I had a series of deaths after his death that, but his death was so large in my life that all I felt was the accumulation of grief as I moved through all the other deaths. And so I think I've shaped my reading about that. I just saw how 9/11 was this huge event, so obvious, and how I think many of us are going to be dealing with this, depending on your age and circumstance, of this slow and drawn out process of deaths. So my Tai Chi teacher used to say, put a beginning on it and put an ending on it. So everything, even our practice, every movement we did involved that. So I'm going to have that frame, but I'm a lyric poet, not a narrative poet. But part of the framing is to move from ordinary time into a different space, while still being in the world, and then putting an ending on it to return to the world. So I just want to say that's the shape of this reading. And I'll begin. So this is called Votive. It's my preparation and beginning. Like Horatio, as fate or chance or luck would have it, vigilant, the watchword I say, oh say, do you mind while I stand here, mind the gap between desire and fulfillment? Meanwhile, do not mistake it. Mark you, we are here. This is a story, a love story. As a writer of color, but I think it may be true of many other people who find themselves at odds with the idea of America for various reasons. You're almost obliged to write a poem like this one, which is a love-hate poem with our country. And there's a Korean poet priest called Manhai, and he was writing poems that could look like erotic poems, but he was writing about Korea after it was occupied by Japan, and this great sense of longing and desire for country. So I think that when I was putting this book together, This is Totem America, I was thinking about that kind of way in which we tend to separate those kinds of things. And I was trying to, in this book, pull those things together. I married out. My late husband's family is originally from Michigan, but they were a military family. So this is called Of Thee I Sing, and it's actually about the Oklahoma City bombing. And if you know a little bit about history and the incarceration of Japanese Americans during World War II, and you sort of move forward, there's a first wave of immigrants. Many of us come from families that were laborers, and that it wasn't until the Civil Rights Movement in its wake, the Immigration Act was passed that opened up immigration again. But of course, what it asked for was skilled labor. And then subsequently, because of war, refugees were brought. It's kind of an echo of what we're dealing with. So this was a kind of response to the Oklahoma City bombing before we knew who did it. And the way it was a kind of double trauma to some communities. So it has two epigraphs. One is from the Washington Post by Dave Moranis. Before release of composite sketches of two John Does, there was a widespread assumption fueled by media speculation that the horrific act in America's heartland had to be the work of Middle Eastern terrorists. People on the street talked about the renewed suspicion of foreigners. One called the bombing a declaration of war, not unlike Pearl Harbor. And the second is a little quote from an essay, I believe it was James Merrill's essay on Elizabeth Bishop. And he had visited her when she was living in Brazil. And this is the little snippet from that essay. Don't be upset, Jose Alberto. I'm only crying in English. Not long after news of the Oklahoma City bombing broke, I thought, it's deja vu all over again. The grief in my throat like acid reflux. What could I do but laugh? I thought of a friend's mother in Michigan, part of a group of Iranian Americans, large enough to constitute a minority. When he and I first met near Osaka, Americans hadn't yet topped critical mass. People were curious. He was free to be thoroughly American, getting a waitress's attention by playing a cowboy accent for all it was worth. Sumi my san, he said, or arigato. Then break into real Japanese, fluently casual, unlocking the waitress's eyes from mine, turning her mouth half frown, half grimace into a smile. There, he didn't mind being a foreigner. I, on the other hand, till a sip of beer or my native tongue betrayed me, could and liked being invisible. But I confess I sometimes sought out modern restaurants just to listen to American music. I once watched him close the distance between himself and a group of schoolboys, working up the nerve, then chanting, Gaijin, Gaijin, and he starting to hop and sway from side to side, keeping their rhythm, his arms tense and shivering in mock delight, then advancing, pointing, chanting back, Nihonjin, Nihonjin, running, the boys craning their necks backwards and squealing. Having been talked into taping and watching reruns of Cheers and packing more than once from the States, nearly halfway around the world, in fact, bagfuls of combos, boxes of Pop-Tarts, I know why he makes a model of Sam Malone. Incorrigible womanizer. He translates that challenge into charming free meals from strangers and friends too. I knew his game and liked him in spite of it. Sometimes what comes back is the sound of his feet shuffling against the tiled walk as we make our way through a mall near Takatsuki Honki Station. I paused to look back, see his wrists limp and pointy see his wrists limp above his pointy elbows. And on a day neither of us knows what to make of our lives, he's leaning against me saying, carry me. But it's recalling the incongruity and utter compatibility of the last meal we shared before I stopped my trans-Pacific visits that turned the weather forecast into background noise. Before us on the table, a dozen dishes portioned into servings no bigger than a mouthful, weird compromises of Eastern and Western cuisine whose names escape me. I know it's wrong, but I want to say enoki pizza or Texas-style sushi to give you the flavor of it. To my grazer's delight, we ate and ate, keeping each other in beer, in a country where only the intemperate pour their own, where the simple act could mean, here, your glass is nearly empty, or please, my glass is nearly empty, and talked until he turned, as I knew he would, to the question he would ask me each time I met him. After so many years, aren't you tired of living with the same person? Outside the glass wall of the restored 18th century structure, its thatched roof weathered but intact, was a garden so carefully constructed, it seemed perfectly natural. In a tiny waterfall, and under the waterfall, a bamboo dipper, the kind you might see at temples, that filled, then seesawed empty, clunk, clink, then started to fill again. Pointing, I said, it's like that. After Brad's death, the big challenge has been not to yield to bitterness, but through a particular period, I couldn't not grapple with it personally, and so I thought maybe I'll try to put on the ugly voice and experiment with tone and not be so welcoming a speaker. And this is one of them. It's called Confessional. And I think off recording, we were talking a little bit about technology. And I think that I saw this video clip. I was teaching Asian American studies of a confrontation on a San Francisco Muni bus. And I had to do some research to understand context, but Chinatown, which was sort of a closed environment in some ways, the housing authority had opened it up. And this was an incident on a bike. I hope it's obvious. On the bus. And I hope it's obvious the particular nature of the confrontation, which was really disturbing to me. But more disturbing still was to see, as we've all been familiar with to some extent in social media, all the comments that were happening afterwards. And so my response is more to how we're all sort of in some ways caught by it. So this is called Confessional. If you're holding the charts that map out the constellations while looking to name a few stars, say Altair, Vega, Aldebaran, or if you're searching for cartoonish explosions, for remix or parody on the screen, maybe this isn't for you. I'm serious. I've been told I'm too serious. Sorry. In truth, I don't mean I'm sorry. I just want an unlocked gate to swing on the hinge of those words. When I say I put down my cat last month, I'm not talking about talking. I mean, I shut the gate. I mean, at 4 a.m, I woke to the sound of distress. Slow after 19 years, I did finally learn to hear it and held him through a seizure. A fissure the self he was slipped through. After which, for him, all of life was refusal. I called the vet. I put him in the carrier I called the death car. After I put down my other cat to own my actions. Don't ask me to name my cats. If you're still with me, perhaps you're thinking, Christ, they're just cats. Well, after the fact, thought said some of the onlookers and virtual onlookers watching two women putting each other down, catfight. Bitch, one woman had said. Fuck you, you're stupid, the other repeated. And then the first punch, then clawing and a prying loose. Christ, it's just a seat. It's a seat on the bus where the people go round and round. If you were listening, I think you know what I mean. Perhaps it's why we're unapologetic. I know I'm being a hypocrite. This is a virtual sound of grief turned grievance, and that is my grief. The last gasps rattle a body. I know, remember my cat? Rumor has it, departing souls, like the hottest stars burn blue. In the language of fists, it's red, a cheek flames red. It's a sorry sight. Sorry, I'm saying. Sorry. I'm gonna leave a poem off and move on. I think I'm running out of time already. This is a poem I wrote for my grandmother's funeral. I mean, I wrote it much later. And my grandmother, who came to the United States, is a picture bride, meaning my grandfather picked her through a matchmaker. That was real common. When she died, she basically outlived her friends. And public speaking is, as I understand it, one of the worst fears for many people. But in typical Asian fashion, she asked my brother to do it. My brother is a musician and a math teacher, and has since retired. And he looked at her and said, ask Debra, that's what she does. So it came to me to do that. And I had no idea how big my grandmother's reach was as a practicing Buddhist. And so the only thing I could think to do was pull out some of the earlier poems the poems I had written about my family. Of which she was a kind of center. I grew up in a very sheltered, extended family environment. But I didn't realize part of the gift would be that it was also a kind of permission to move beyond that kind of writing because simply to be a writer and to be able to do what I was doing, not as a matter of subject, but what I was doing was probably enough. So this is called the Eulogy. Roughly the size of a grain of rice, the scar is barely visible now. Touching it brings back my mother's mouth saying nothing before I left that evening, and my sister saying lemon juice when I returned. She was up, not waiting, watching TV. I sliced a lemon and rubbed its juice into the ink stamped on my hand at the first of a string of bars. 15 years gone, I've been more guest than family, tagging along with cousins, my first time ever bar hopping in Honolulu. Unwilling to offend with my good English, I'd mostly listened, nodded, and sipped as they drank, and we made small talk and made our money talk, one-upping each other by flashing bills for the next round. At the Korean bar, when conversation flagged, we sang karaoke. Half of me wishes I'd gotten wasted with them, and the other part of me struggling to stay awake wonders what made me say yes in the first place. At the kitchen sink, I traded lemon juice first for soap, then for soap and the light scraping of my thumbnail, then thumbnail and running water, then soap in a nylon scouring pad. Afterwards, with my sister, I sat in the dark till the movie ended. The next morning, I dressed for the funeral where, because not one among the 500 gathered could speak as a friend. On behalf of the family, my mother had asked me to speak. And simply because I could, I spoke of my grandmother's life and read a few poems. The spot I'd rubbed raw glistened and stung like flesh under a freshly broken blister. I thought I would read, I'm writing Renku with a colleague of mine, Robin Lippincott. And I thought that, and that's sort of where my interests are right now. That sort of writing, but it's been with me for a long time. And I thought it wouldn't be right for me not to at least read one of these kinds of things, except that when I was writing as practice, a long sequence in 1999, which was the big Y2K panic about what would happen to all our computers. So I thought it might be a good year to do it. And I was influenced by a book called, I believe it's called Chased by the Light. It was a National Geographic photographer who said, I shoot rolls and rolls of film. And he said, what if I just took one picture a day? And so he did that. And the book is just the photographs mostly and a little bit of text. And so I thought, okay, I can do that. As a poet, I can do that. I can commit to that. And I regarded it as practice and seeing. And what I learned from doing and also from reading about his process was some days you wake up and there's the photo. And then there are other days when you have 3 or 4 opportunities and you say, no, there's something better out there. And the anxiety to find that one photograph before it gets dark, and the light disappears. So that's what this was about. And at the time I was on tour, courtesy of my publisher at the time, with another poet. And that enters near the end of this. So this is not meant to have some great meaning. It's really an attempt to be an experience. And it's just easiest to let the images wash over you. Some will catch your attention, some won't. in the same way that if you're fortunate enough to be able to walk, to drop any kind of guard or shield because you're worried, you can just walk and look, and you have a route and a destination, and that's it. That's it. So that's what this is. And this is the September fake renku. I had a lot to learn when I undertook this, and had to get rid of some of my arrogance in order to get closer to what renku was. So here we go. Hurricane Dennis churns the waters farther south. At dusk, the first geese. The burden of ripening fruit weighing the vine earthward. Is that who you are, hunched over under it? Trees are groaning, let go. Squirrels chatter and squawk, ghostly the one mourning dove's 5 notes. Under a growing pile of letters, books, a bill, past due, too stuffy. The sky's a soggy gray sponge this morning, fog just lifting. A seesaw, this sunshine rain, and we are granted one more day of summer. Undoing steady designs, these milkweeds and sunflowers. Amuse this 9th day of the 9th month in the year 1999. Umbrella hooked on her desk, she's in the car, no break yet. Yellow leaves shaken loose, on each one veins forking are paths on a path. Out of the woods, the woodchuck up on 2 legs looks ahead, back. The crisp Granny Smith, this morning's air chilling a glass of orange juice. Floyd's calm eye veering northwest towards Florida. Winds, big winds, now turning northeast, spawning small tornadoes, whisk brooms near a vacuum. Bridging the gap between chair and sill, cricket's sleek body. A cup of coffee to wake with, for a nightcap 2 glasses of wine. You'll find, instead of the silence you were after, oblivion, like floodwaters, muddy and thick, making of homes, islanded houses. Here, a spring blue sky above Walden Pond, all a glitter. Into the water they waded, footprints on the path disappearing. At trail's edge, a red-spotted purple emerges, turns back. This year, for the 2nd time in equal measure, daylight, clear and cool, clear night. Like the head chefs, one noted his style in the embellishments. What lingers, not the elaborate garden, but the dead black squirrel's hands. Trucks rumble past the white tent, words flowed with the stop and go. She unfolded chairs, unconvinced that if you build it, they would come. Come what may, the top kept on, constant as lake water lapping. Overhead, churning in a darkening sky, seagulls like whirligigs, like the wind's gathering strength, suddenly vanished. How am I doing for time, Diane? Should I cut some more? I have, I think, 2 more that I would like to, 2 more things. But who knows what happens when I start talking about them. Okay. This is a poem I wrote for my Tai Chi teacher, fortunately, before he died. His wonderful and very creative wife, who's a potter by training, but she was also doing Tai Chi, would every year have a party for him. And on his 72nd birthday, which is a special birthday, she wrote all of us in the school saying, could you please write something up? And she put together a book of all this writing. So that was like a writing prompt, or occasional poem. And at the time he had health issues, and the fact of having to write this, the pressure of having to write this, also made me reflect on the many ways all that time spent with him built a relationship that was so many different things. And with all of the affliction and irritation of family, and all these extremely valuable lessons. So this is called the banana tree. Aimless as I am, I could never have found it on my own, nor find what is found there. Under a canopy of tall trees, a black-leaved sapling turned willow beside which my root sinks so deep, I might believe I'd emerged somewhere in China. My guide, a man-made honorary mare by a cow's gift of a heart valve. Say that old horse is the very earth. Say that very green upturned 5-gallon plastic bucket is a tortoise on which I sat, beside that wiry man holding his staff. It's a snake, you know, old as the one Moses owned. With the one I borrowed, it's leaning against a tree. From his vest pocket, 2 bananas. I eat one. The peels lie on my side like beached octopi in the quiet of that uncertain place. One at a time, he picks up the peels by the stem end, hangs each one on a bare spot of the banana tree. Laughing now, I am beside myself, eyes tearing for everything taken and given, alive again in the memory of it, in the pale, fresh peels, like blossoms, like birds' beaks of my hand not yet closed in single whip, in those soon-to-be new leaves, draped as if brought forth from within and sprung from the branch, each taking its place among the others gone black. I feel very lucky to have written that poem when he could read it. He was still alive to read it. And not only that, to have had it published by a publication in North Carolina, which is where he lived, and to give that to him. It was a wonderful thing, and that has made me rethink the whole matter of publication, which I'm so terrible about. So I'll close with something that's a prose poem. I had to get over my own resistance to start calling it a prose poem. I still think of it as a prose piece. But when I couldn't write, one of the things I like about this idea of poetry is approaching song, the condition of song. As you know, grief breaks a singer's voice. And what we're living through is certainly, I think, a time where that is very possible. It's hard to sing. So I kind of deceived myself by enrolling in a workshop in microfiction, because it's prose, right? It's fiction. And I soon realized I'm not a fiction writer, and I've never been a fiction writer. I can't tell stories. So, and then I sort of came face to face about the truth. I'm a lyric poet, and I still feel in many ways that for someone of my temperament, going into prose in the prose poem is a form of last resort. And I reconcile that by saying, well, it kind of feels like that right now. And so going back to the opening and closing, Lama was always saying, put an ending on it. And so I'm going to end, if I can find it, with this prose thing that got published under the banner of prose poetry. And I have another friend who's a switch hitter, Sarah Freelake, to thank for this because she ran that workshop. And it was super encouraging. And so we are returning to the world now. This is called How Not to Make a Scene in a Time of Pandemic. I'm not the best reader for this because in my mind sort of was, I'm dating it with my reference, Rosanna Dana, who just kept drifting. So you have to imagine a proper voice in your own head. Put two people in a bar. Well, no, not there. Make it a small room. Are they facing each other or are their backs turned? If they're facing each other, what's on their faces? Is it a yin-yang kind of thing? One smile, one frown? Maybe one set of lips flatlined below eyes angled forward. If their backs are turned, maybe add a black cat, like at Halloween, you know, back hunched, a hackled body, except in the air, upright. Carefully consider where the cat's tail is. One wrong detail and it's game over, dude. Incidentally, aren't cats' tails a marvel? Like a fifth hand, third if you're strictly anthropocentric. Shame on you. I saw a video of a cat released from 10 feet up, probably even higher. Just seeing anything without one limb on the ground could, on any given day, trigger my acrophobia. Anyway, that cat's tail, never mind its spine, whirled like a propeller in slow-mo. Well, not really. I just said that to make it cartoonish, because I'm talking about a real cat here. And I love cats. Don't mess with real cats. So where was I? Just put two people in a room. Anything can happen. The one thing I'd suggest, though, is that they not be hugging, much less kissing. It's all downhill from there. Gravity, you know. Unless, of course, they're cats. Thanks for listening.